they get triggered by my partner, and then I try to cope with that. I don't want that to be true. And then the way I cope triggers my partner's deepest, darkest fears or childhood wounds. And then they try to cope with that. And then how they cope triggers mine.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Impetus, Minds of the Driven. On this episode, we have a very dear friend of mine, Elizabeth Polinsky. She is the host of the Communicate and Connect podcast, which I have had the pleasure of being on before, as well as being a marriage counselor and just all-around phenomenal, bubbly person that I love having conversations with. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I get to just have another fun conversation with you.
And I get to learn more about your actual background and history and what sort of drives your mindset and share that with everyone. We have amazing conversations all over the place. And so we're going to talk about how you got into marriage counseling, what it is that drove you to start working on your PhD. And then at the end of this thing, whenever we go to the bonus content on locals.com, so if you want access to the bonus part of this conversation, you have to go over to locals.com/forerunner. That is locals.com/forerunner and become a supporter to unlock all of our extra goodies. We're going to be talking about some marriage counseling tips for Jake Sully and his partner in Avatar, and Liz and Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. We're going to see what our Liz here has to say and what advice that she could give to their relationships from a marriage counselor's perspective. So I feel like that's going to be a lot of fun and gives me an opportunity to sort of dive into my film knowledge a little bit. So if you want access to that, you have to be a supporter at forerunnerproductions.locals.com. Okay, it's forerunnerproductions.locals.com or Forerunner Productions. I totally just jacked that up. It's fine. We're going to keep going.
He can cut it.
Cut it, Chase, cut it. Also, one of the things that you guys will notice is that we are in the wonderful Pale Horse Coffee main location back here where they roast all of their coffee. If you want 15% off of your order from palehorsecoffee.com, make sure you use promo code Forerunner. Again, palehorsecoffee.com, promo code Forerunner at checkout for 15% off of your order. Stay caffeinated, stay angry, look unapproachable. Okay, now that all of the bills have been paid, more or less, what inspired you to get into marriage counseling? It's an interesting field, and I can understand that it would be probably a margin stressful having to bring people in that have typically issues. People who don't have issues typically don't go to counseling because they don't think they need counseling, for better or worse. So what drove you to go into a field that is, for lack of a better phrase, sort of a downer?
Okay, well, I do not think it's a downer, but I do not think it's a downer. I'm sorry, that was really funny to me because I think marriage counseling is way more fun than individual therapy.
Okay.
So I definitely don't feel like it's a downer. Sorry, that made me crack up.
So I say that because that would be the common man sort of approach to people that know nothing about it. When they come into it, are probably going to expect me and why do you want to help couples with their problems? That seems like it's just a ton of drama all the time.
Yeah, well, so I have so many answers to that. I could tell you so in the present day, why do I want to help couples with their problems is because I think it's the last battle for my personal growth and for my own healing from my past. Whatever I brought to the relationship and the marriage, whatever sort of insecurities, abandonment stuff, or I feel not good enough or not valuable or people won't really respect me, all of that stuff shows up in the marriage. And no matter how much individual counseling you've done, it's gonna show up in the marriage. And so that's the place where it can really finally get healed. I know we were talking about books before we got started. There is a book, oh my gosh, what is it? Gary Thomas. I can't remember the title of it right now, but it's a Christian-based book about marriage. And one of the things he writes at the very beginning was marriage is to make you holy, not happy. And that always stood out to me because it is about how you're going to heal. It's like, how do you become, I know he was talking spiritually holy, but
Right.
how do you become whole, in my mind, is through, like, whole as a person, is through healing the stuff in the marriage. So that was a long answer, but that's the current day answer. I have lots
Okay.
of things historically that have led me up to this. But
Okay. Well, explain one of those things too. Like, what was the first thing in the most recent past, beyond just like why you're doing it now, that said, okay, maybe I would be interested in this?
Yeah, so the more recent past, so I've always had an interest in relationships, and I think that comes from my own family background. But before I did what I'm currently doing, I worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs, doing individual therapy and group therapy on an outpatient basis. And so I also was one of the only people trained in a certain type of therapy for PTSD. So I got pretty much all the sexual trauma cases because the other person was a male, and so then they would want to work with a female. That's kind of, I'm sorry, too much in the details. But I worked at the VA, loved it, dream job, amazing. And then I got married, and I happened to marry someone in the military, and then I had to move around. And so part of how I navigated that, not wanting to give up my dream job, was trying to think, what other dreams do I want to accomplish? And I was thinking, well, at that time, I hadn't done couples therapy or family therapy, and I decided I wanted to learn something new. So that's how it happened then, as a way for me to further my career, having to follow the military around, but also just to learn something new that I didn't know how to do yet.
How long were you doing the individual counseling thing before you transferred into marriage couples therapy?
4 or 5 years.
Okay. How long have you been in the field now?
6 or 7 years.
Of just couples therapy?
Oh, no.
Oh, total,
I'm sorry, that's total.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
so it's been,
I was about to say, it's like you don't.
over 2 years.
It's like, I know you're not old enough to be like 15 years into this thing.
No, but I started really early.
Okay.
Let's see, I think I started with my first therapy clients when I was 23. So I was pretty young.
Now, what institution did you go to get your therapist degree, your degree in therapy or whatever? Like,
Yeah. So I have my master's in social work.
okay.
I went to the University of South Carolina in Columbia
Okay.
to get my master's of social work. And then I did a postgraduate fellowship for the VA that was focused on providing therapy for veterans. Then I worked for the Department of Mental Health in South Carolina for a while, went back to the VA, and then when we moved after I got married and we came to Norfolk, that I went into a PhD program for marriage and family therapy, so that way I could really learn,
Yeah.
for real how to do couples counseling. So,
And you're in that PhD program right now.
Yep.
So what is it like to be working full time and also be pursuing a PhD?
Exhausting. Exhausting.
Okay. What does your schedule look like doing such a thing?
Yeah, so I provide counseling services Monday through Thursday. I see up to 6 people in a day, which is full time for a therapist is 30 hours a week, so I do about 20, something like that. But I do up to 6 hours a day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday I work on my schoolwork, but it usually rolls into the weekend.
What's that PhD schoolwork like? Like, what does that work like? Is it a lot of reading? You get a lot of writing that you have to do? Like, what does that actually look like? Because a lot of people are like, oh, you get to be a PhD in this thing, but like they don't actually understand what the effort level is to go into this thing.
Yeah, there's been a lot in my program. So there have been a lot of courses that have been reading, very reading heavy. Has been a lot of writing to consolidate the information that I've learned and to present it back to show that I've learned it, but then also designing research projects. Some of my more recent courses had really interesting things like pretend you're giving a lecture to students who want to do what you do, or do a podcast, like pretend you're doing a podcast episode. So that stuff is kind of fun that they had that in the courses.
Pretend you're doing a podcast episode.
Yeah.
That must be really difficult for you.
Yeah, it was real easy, but I enjoyed it. So I've tried to, like the things that I had to do for school, incorporate it into my work, those types of things.
Now, was it one of those assignments that led you to starting the podcast, or did you how did the podcast come about?
That was my COVID project.
Okay.
So I, just like everybody, COVID was really hard, and especially right at the beginning, I had been seeing most of my clients in person. They, we all thought it was going to be like a month or something. And they didn't want to do telehealth, so we stopped, thinking we would come back in person a couple months later. That didn't happen. It was, telehealth for a really long time. And so, like a lot of clients stopped therapy right at the beginning of COVID, and then people who were more comfortable with telehealth services would start. And so I had a chunk of time there at the very beginning, and I was like, well, I'm gonna find a way to use it,
right,
and make something another dream,
How many people, what are some of the interesting people that you've had an opportunity to interview in the process of going through that, and you're not allowed to say me?
Okay, well, I have lots of colleagues that I know from either my previous work at the VA or other things that I do, and so that's been really nice to be able to incorporate them into the podcast. So like Dr. Andy Santinello and Dr. Wyatt, oh my gosh, I can't think of his last name. That's killing me right now. I can't think of his last name.
It'll
but
come
like
to you.
one of them works for the Center for Deployment Psychology, so they're just like, and the other one was involved in a lot of research around moral injury, so like people who really know their stuff, and that's fun to be able to disseminate that.
So you said something right there called moral injury. What is that about? That's a term that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, moral injury. So if I do something that violates my sense of morality, I'll feel moral pain. And maybe I should feel moral pain because it violates my value system. So, like dishonesty, maybe.
Okay.
If I was dishonest, I would feel some moral pain and guilt around that. But a moral injury, people typically talk about it with the military, and specifically around like deployments. Like maybe I had to, like a child died as a result of my actions in combat. Even if they were good actions, I was defending people, I was protecting other people, somewhat like the kid was attacking me or the kid had a bomb, but still there's a lot of pain around that.
Still a kid.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I can't get past it, when it interferes with my ability to enjoy a barbecue with my family, or movie night, and I can't participate because it's different than PTSD, but they often go together. then that would be considered a moral injury.
Gotcha. Do you see moral injuries playing a pretty significant role in relationship dynamics? Is that something that comes up a bit?
It can, especially for military couples where there's been combat.
Okay.
Not as common for the couples that I see where they haven't been like combat related.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember in that episode we talked about like, could moral injury come up from other places, like in relationships? I think like if I was abusive towards somebody, and I have guilt over that, that's appropriate guilt. That's like good pain to have.
Right.
But then if it prevents me from then being able to repair,
Gotcha.
or maybe, there are lots of reasons why violence happens and why abuse happen, and that's maybe a really longer conversation, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to. I know that's not your area of expertise per se, and so I don't want to take too much time in that area. I find that fascinating as well, and maybe that's a conversation that you can put me in touch with one of your doctor friends, because I have a slew of questions that I would love to ask along that area, because one of the things that I talk about quite a bit is morality, natural law versus religious morality. How do you identify the natural law, and then like how does that affect how you act, and that just all of that bleeds morality one way or the other. And so talking about how we sort of consciously offend our morality in a way, and then how that does damage to us, like is sort of an interesting perspective to go down. Like we know that something's right, and yet we go against it anyway, and how that damages us.
Like a war situation is very different, right? Like what is right in war, right? It's like a whole different type of thing, but it really is hard for people, hard on their hearts.
So in a second, where I'm going to ask you more about sort of your childhood leading up to your undergrad program, where you went to undergrad at, and then sort of what happened in your undergrad, if anything happened in your undergrad that maybe wanted you to made you direct your career towards the master's program that you went into. But first, I have to tell you guys all about my book, which is You're Not Special, You're Gifted. It is everywhere that you can possibly get your book, especially on like Amazon and all that stuff. I have a few signed copies that if you guys want, you can reach out to us. You can drop a comment below and we'll reach out to you even, but make sure that you guys are picking up a copy of my book, You're Not Special, You're Gifted. I'm a first-time author, but this book has sold over 100 copies so far, and it is getting really awesome reviews. One of the favorite quotes from one of the patrons here at Pale Horse Coffee that was nice enough to host my first book signing said that their favorite quote out of the book so far is where I say, "Don't be a shortcut taking turd." And as you can probably attest to, like the podcast, everything, there is no shortcuts being taken around here. So make sure that you pick up a copy if you want some more phenomenal modern day wisdom like that. But also make sure that you're heading over to forerunnerproductions.locals.com. If you sign up for a supportership that is over $10 or more, you get a free copy of any book that we publish through Forerunner Publications, which is our publishing arm, which is also where my book comes from. So if you want a free signed copy of my book, make sure that you are a supporter for $10 or more at forerunnerproductions.locals.com or locals.com/forerunner. All of that stuff works. All that gets you to the right place. Okay, so where did you go to undergrad at?
The University of Texas in El Paso, Texas. So
in the middle of the desert.
Yes, that is my hometown.
Gotcha. So you decided to stay home for undergrad?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a commuter school. It was very common where I grew up.
So what did you get your undergrad in that sort of led to that master's?
Okay, so I got my undergrad in linguistics.
Whoa, okay. This is where the story, the plot thickens. What language did you study?
Arabic.
Really?
Yeah. But
so in the desert, okay, the American desert, but in the desert, and you're studying Arabic.
Yeah, I had a partner who was like half Palestinian at the time.
Okay.
And so, and I just really thought it was interesting. I had tried, growing up in El Paso, I had so many Spanish classes throughout middle school, high school, and I really struggled with Spanish. So I needed something else. I needed something else, and it was really fun. I really enjoyed trying to learn it. But linguistics, I think as a whole, like while I did study Arabic as part of that, it's more like the science of language, which I think has been really helpful for me as a therapist, because like just thinking about how do we get meaning from sounds, and how do we then somehow make sense of these sounds in our brains, like that's just really fascinating to me.
Right.
So the programming, in a way, my mind's programming is maybe the connection between linguistics and therapy.
That is so fascinating to me. If there's one thing that is, like, we talk about all the time about how like certain elements of our society are fabricated, et cetera, et cetera. Like if there's one fabrication that we have been living with literally since the dawn of communication, it's language, right? Like words are fabrications, right? Like they are fabrications to represent something, right? Whether it be an emotion or a thing or an action. And so I find that really interesting to think about sort of the science behind all of that. What is there like a common driver to how we get certain meanings from words? Is there, I mean, a lot of it I know is historic, but you see people that are linguists all the time being hired on for movies and different things to like full on build languages. And so like share a little bit of that science with me if you could. I know it's like asking you to go way back.
Yeah, that is way back. That is very way back. But I think like this is one of the things that separates us from other mammals is our ability to have language and to communicate this way. And so although there are some animals like monkeys and stuff that can do sign language and they can communicate some stuff, but we're all sort of born with the ability to learn language and to learn multiple languages. And I think it's just part of how we are learning to interact in the world,
Sign language is another one that really I find to be extremely interesting, because one of the things that you get out of the spoken language is that you can tell a mood or something like that based on the inflection and the intensity of which something is said. And I struggle to find that sort of same emphasis in sign language. Like, what do I do? If I'm angry, do I just sign it faster? like not to make fun of anything, I genuinely don't understand it.
Yeah, well, so much of communication is body language. And so this might be interesting to you. So it's something like, it's like 93% of communication is tone of voice and body language. And so with sign language, there are ways to convey tone. I don't know how to sign, so I probably cannot really tell you a lot about that. But body language, facial expressions, things like that give a lot of the added meaning to language.
Going back to your experience with Arabic, what are some of the biggest differences that you noticed from Arabic to English? Is there anything that specifically sticks out? I know that, for instance, German sounds much more aggressive than English, even though they're both Germanic languages. So I didn't know if there would be a structure difference or a way that things are spoken or said that make things interesting to learn or make it sound more aggressive or more loving or something like that. Like, what are some of the biggest differences that you remember from back then? I'm asking you to go way back again.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's prettier, but I realize like everybody probably has emotional feelings about different languages, but I think it's beautiful. I love the sound of it. I love how it's written. I think that one of the challenging parts was to read backwards, or for us,
right
the other direction, and to write the other direction. they have, conjugations, and different ways of like adding something to the beginning of a word or to the end of the word to convey more meaning to it, which I think is different than in English.
So in German, I know that they put the verb last. So you have to listen to the entire sentence. And so you actually promulgate a culture of listeners more so than you do speakers in German. Whereas in English, where we start with pretty much the subject and the verb, you can almost inference the rest of the sentence, which is how you get a lot of English speakers talking over each other in conversation all the time, because you don't have to listen to the whole sentence. So long as you know roughly what the context of the conversation is about, you can sort of fill it in. So I didn't know if there was anything similar to that sort of difference in the Arabic side of things that might impact not only just the language itself, but the culture.
So that I don't think I could comment on.
Okay, all right.
I'll just be real transparent and honest about that, because while I studied that, like, I was really more focused on the science under
language
and how people learn language. Like, what is the commonality across all languages, more so than a particular language. Okay. So
now, what was the jump from language to therapy? Like, what was the catalyst, right? What we call this show Impetus, Minds of the Driven, because it is the turning point in people's lives. It's the turning point in their mindset, trying to help other people, trying to help you, the audience, find motivation and inspiration in some of these things. What was that impetus for you that changed the direction of your life so drastically?
There were a few things that happened. So when I started my undergrad, I wanted to do like ministry related things.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I know, the shocker. You didn't know that about me.
Yeah, I didn't know that you had a Christian background at all.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And I had worked in youth ministry, and that didn't work out for a variety of reasons. And so that was one thing, is like my original sort of thought was not coming to fruition. At the same time, I was involved in my own personal counseling. I had a lot of grief-related things going on during that time, and my counselor was like, "Oh, you could make a great counselor." and at the same time, I had some friends who, like, different people say the same thing to me, that maybe counseling would be a good fit for you.
Sort of a hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Yeah, so that's when I started looking into counseling, and I had a mentor who was in the social work program, who I confided in her, like, I'm thinking about counseling, but this is such a shift. I mean, it's not really, because I'm helping people, which is what I wanted to do anyway.
Just hitting it from a different angle.
Yes, but I wasn't sure at that time if, like, counseling just, and that only was going to be the right fit. So she was suggesting social work, because social workers can do counseling, but they could do a lot of other things that are still in the, like, helping realm. And so that was all going on. And then at the same time, I was coming to the end of my linguistics degree and thinking, what on earth can I do with a linguistics degree other than go get a PhD and teach or be a translator?
Yeah, or I mean, you could also go to the mission field with it, but whenever the ministry thing didn't work out for you, like, I can see how that would sort of be distasteful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
I did think a lot about being a translator for Arabic, but I think it just felt more natural to go into the social work realm. So,
what countries speak primarily Arabic? Because I know that in the Middle East, there's like a ton of different dialects, everything from Pashtun to what have you, right? Like,
yeah.
So, was there any specific? I know you said that you focused more on the science of the language and everything like that. So, I just didn't know if there was any, like, countries that would have been specifically applicable for.
Well, I had I would have, anywhere that I would go, I would have to get like the local dialect.
Right.
Yeah. So I was learning the like modern, I forget what it's called, but like the modern version where like the academic version of Arabic. So I probably would have sounded very weird to
That was the
a
thing
regular
that, so
person.
Man, when I was in German, I want to relate with you a little bit here about the weirdness of it. When I was taking my German classes in high school, it was kind of a struggle for me in certain ways because I was learning the academic way to talk versus I had a sister-in-law who is German and knew the local dialects. And so when I would try and talk with her, she would be like, why are you saying it like that? Like, say it like this. And then we would go into the class and I would say it like that, or I would write it like that, and I would get it wrong. And I'm like, but that's the way they speak it. Like, I don't care how they speak it. And I'm like, why don't you care how they speak it? Like, if you don't care how they speak it, and you're just like, why do I care about this class?
Yes, exactly. Same thing in English, right? So I can say, but this happened, or I could say, and did I tell you about this? I'm starting my sentence with a but or an and, but in no way am I going to be allowed to do that on a paper.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Yeah. Which I break that rule all the time in this book. Like my editor actually got on me about it because I wanted to write it as though I was talking. I wanted it to be
conversational.
I wanted people to feel whenever they were reading it like I was there talking to them, like I was sharing my experiences, like it was a conversation that we were having. And so I wrote it like that. And my editor's like, you're driving me insane.
Yeah.
You better stop this. Like, Jason, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's a funny side note. So, was there anything? We're continuing backwards in this thing. Typically I go from the beginning to the end to like where you're at now. In this particular conversation, I've started like where you're at, and we're going backwards in this thing.
Right.
What led you to the linguistics side of life?
Yeah.
Getting older and older and harder to remember.
I know. We're going back. Well, like I mentioned, I wanted to do ministry, but my parents were very like, you need to go to college. And this makes a lot of sense because I'm the first one in my family to go to college.
Okay.
So, and they felt like that was really important for me to do.
Do you agree with their sentiment now?
Oh, I'm so glad.
Really?
I'm so grateful that they pushed me to go to college. Yeah, I was basically, maybe this is too strong, but my perception, when I was 17 was that I was going to be like homeless and on my own if I didn't go to college. So it was like that strong of a, like, you're going type of thing. And so I went. And I didn't really know what I wanted to study, but I worked at a church at that time, and I had some friends who I'm still very close to today, who they studied linguistics. And I was like, this is so fascinating. I'm going to study what you studied. And we would, just that type of thing. So I really don't think I had a plan, which is maybe the downside of being like pushed to go to college.
That's my biggest qualm with the modern culture of, well, I have two huge qualms with the modern culture of pushing your kids to go to college. First and foremost is the idea that what you're talking about, like they're at that age, they typically don't know who they are, what they want, or what they want to do with the rest of their life. And so you're putting them into a ton of debt, hoping that something's going to stick and pay off.
Yeah.
Rather than, taking half that amount of money, letting them either work or travel or get some life experience, discover what it is that maybe they want to do with their lives, and then going to college and like actually getting a skill set.
Yeah.
Right? You're aiming for a piece of paper in hopes that you're going to have it pay off, right? And which leads me into my second thing is that the ROI in modernity is not what it was in the 80s, right? Or the 70s. You went to college in the 70s or 80s, you came out with a degree, like you're paying off that degree in 10 years, and then you have like the rest of your life where you're just stacking cash because the market will actually return your investment for you. Nowadays, you're going into $80, $90, $100,000 worth of debt over the course of 4 years, and then you have to like hope and pray that you can get a job. And then you're trying to do something unique because you see that the market's saturated with all of these different jobs, or all of them are boring to crap, or you're stuck at a desk answering emails all day, and you're like, I don't want to spend like 20 years of my life doing that.
I'm following. So I could see where you're coming from. In my circumstance, you know, I figured it out.
Yeah.
But like even my siblings are trying to figure it out now because of what you're talking about. You know, they went to college, but they didn't really have a clear view, and especially in those, you know, you change. Even I changed. I went from linguistics to social work, you know, and through. But in my specific circumstance, I had a lot of scholarships.
Okay.
And so there was like a, don't waste that chance.
I'm in a similar position. So I went to college for a year, flunked out, you know, wasn't anything special in school. Not that I was not an intelligent individual. It was just, I didn't care about doing my schoolwork. I was too busy being a social butterfly. And they don't give out a degree for being a social butterfly. So I left. I went directly into the workforce after that, and because I was a little bit older, I ended up being in a couple managers' roles for companies that employed younger people, and then moved into construction, got some experience doing that, owned my own business for a little while. And I learned more in the 2 years of owning my own business than most people do with like a master's degree in business and economics, right? Like, it's that different being in the real world and actually having to figure out a way to pay your bills than to like study and read a book and say like, oh, this is what'll happen here and this is that law, and like, it's a completely different realm. That's why, like, whenever you hear entrepreneurs that say like, hey, you want to be an entrepreneur, don't go to school for a business entrepreneurship. Take that 40, 50, 60 grand that you would plug into a business entrepreneurship thing and like start a freaking business. It'll probably fail, but start a business, because you're going to learn more in doing that in 2 years, 3 years with that same amount of cash than you're ever going to learn sitting in a classroom.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the career. I completely
agree with this. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go back to school for film, right? There are assets that I can get by going back to film school that I cannot get on my own. Like, I love my cameras, I love my setup. Guys, we're doing amazing things with this thing, but there's stuff that I cannot afford, right?
Right.
And so in order to get access to some of those assets, I have to go back to school to a place that has a THX certified sound design studio, right?
Yeah.
So like, I totally get it. But that's if you know what you want to do, right? I'm 26 and I just figured out what it is I want to do.
Yeah.
And yet people are saying, you need to pick what school and start thinking about what university you want to go to at the age of 16. I was too busy.
It's a lot of pressure.
It's insane.
For kids, yeah.
It's absolutely insane. And then you have the institutions that want to take the first 2 years of your schooling and reteach you everything that you were supposed to learn for the 13 years that you were in school.
Yeah, I'm following your frustration. I don't feel as strongly about this as you do.
You had a very pleasant experience with college compared to what I did. For someone that, and I think that shows the difference in people. And from if I like sort of a life lesson, a story lesson to come out of this part of the conversation, if I had to peg one, it would be like, from a parental perspective, don't force your kids to go to school if they're not the type of person that's going to thrive in that environment. I wasn't the type of person that was going to thrive in that environment coming out of high school. I needed to go get some real world experience. I needed to be kicked in the teeth a couple times, right? I had to go through the level of school of hard knocks and figure out what it was that I actually cared about doing with my life before I was able to identify what skills I needed to figure out where to go to school at. Versus someone like you come out of school, you do well in the educational institutions, you do well in the controlled environment more or less, and being able to figure things out from there was a positive experience for you.
Yeah.
Two completely different walks of life.
I think the part that I can kind of get behind about what you're saying is like, and if I even think about it with my own family, like my parents tried to give me what they didn't have.
Right.
And that's so lovely. Like, I really appreciate how much they wanted to do that for me, but it was also about them and their desire for what they wish they had and their desires for me compared to what I needed. And this is what I see a lot. So I do some family therapy. I'm more into couples. But especially with families, one of the big things that is a conflict between parents and their kids, even their adult kids, is parents wanting so badly what they think is best for their kids that oftentimes blocks them from hearing about what their kids actually need.
Right.
And that does vary from person to person.
I'm so blessed that I come from a family of where my parents, like, they put pressure on me to do this and a little bit to figure it out, and they needed to, but they were also understanding, right? Whenever I said, hey, I want to try and do this, they're like, okay, go do it. I want to try and do this, okay, go do it. Mm-hmm. Like, well, have you considered this? Have you done your research? All right, let's make it happen. And It's been so nice to have that support system where they're not worried, like, they want me to have a successful life, they want me to have a successful future, but, you know, it's been very much like, the mold ain't for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And God forbid, I was never one to fit in the mold. So I was very blessed to be in the situation that I'm in with all of that.
They set you up well with your childhood like that to then be a businessman, right?
They identified at an early age, I made it easy for them to identify, but they identified at an early age that I was good at two things: stories and entrepreneurship. At 7 years old, I was running every summer I would run a short-term apple pie making business. I would take orders, I would get the stuff, I would sell them, and I would take them and I would deliver them.
Yeah.
And my parents were super supportive in helping me pull that off. And then all through school, the one thing that I cared about more than anything else was stories. I wanted to read stories, I wanted to watch stories, I wanted to experience stories, I wanted to play my video games. And it wasn't video games like Call of Duty and stuff like that that I was playing. I was playing stories like Kingdom Hearts, I was playing RPGs like Fallout, I was playing these games that like had real story, and whenever I wasn't getting enough story out of the game, I would go and search for them, right? YouTube's a miraculous thing. And then I would write. I was writing all the time. And so by sort of identifying that and making it easy for mom and dad to identify that, it made it really easy for them to like, okay, you need to do well in school. You got to do what you got to do to be successful in this world, because if you don't do certain things that you don't want to do, you're never going to make it. However, when you do the things that you don't want to do, you're typically making room for the things that you do want to do. So finding that balance has been a very interesting thing. I want to get back to you and talk about, like, okay, so you have this bachelor's degree, you have your master's degree, you're working on your PhD while working full time. That is a lot, right? It's a lot of stress. And I'm sure that there are days everyone feels like this, where it's like, is it worth it? Am I really meant for this type of thing? I want to know, was it from your childhood, something that happened to you in college? Where was it that you got your driven mindset that be like, no matter what doubt flies in my face, I'm pushing through this and I will achieve what I have set out to achieve?
Yeah, so it is very challenging. There are days where I am like, why on earth am I doing this? For me, I really like to learn things. I like things that I think are interesting, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. Like right now I'm getting into homemade wine making, just because that's fun and interesting, right? So that's definitely part of it. That keeps me going, is like, this is interesting to me and I like learning it. But I think, I mentioned this earlier, I think a big part of it was that I was a parentified child growing up.
Yeah, so explain that to me, because I don't know what that means.
So, okay, the long and short of it, right, is that sometimes kids end up feeling like they have to be the parent in their families, that they have to be responsible for various things. And that can be more or less severe depending on the family dynamic that they grow up in.
For example, my grandfather, I talk about him in my book. His dad died. He was the oldest of 7 kids, 11 kids, something crazy like that.
Yeah.
And so he had to become the father figure in the home. His mother was a wonderful woman, but he had to become the father figure in the home.
Yeah, that's a great example of a parentified child.
Okay.
It can also come into play emotionally. So I have to take care of other people emotionally, or I have to keep the peace in the family. So in families, people often take on roles to keep the family going. And to keep the stress level even. And you'll see this a lot with couples, is that they'll have a lot of stress between the two of them, and they will over-focus on a kid. And if they have two, then one of the kids becomes the bad kid, and the other one becomes like the perfect kid. But these are roles that help function to like pull stress away from the marriage, and distribute it around the family, so that way it can be more peaceful overall. Another reason why I like to do couples counseling, because if I can make this really solid between two people, then that decreases, the negative impact, and it flows down to the kids.
Right.
So there are lots of ways that people can become parentified child, and there's different ways it shows up. Like the bad kid is also a parentified child, because now they feel like there's the responsibility on them to distract from stressful moments, or to like sometimes you'll have like a goofy kid, so that can be related as well. So maybe they're not doing bad things, like, I don't know, but they
Class clown type person that's trying to
Thank you.
goofy little troublemaker that's doing it because A, they think it's cute, and B, because it gets them attention, right?
Yeah.
In a way.
Well, they are likely pulling the tension onto them to stop parents from fighting.
Oh, I've never thought about that perspective.
Yeah, they have a function. There's a role that they fill to help the family system.
Is that subconscious mostly?
Yeah. They, kids, their brains are not fully developed, right? Like they can't think abstractly even yet.
They're not going to be out here like, I am going to go and do X to
Yeah.
make this happen. Okay. So yeah, I guess that's sort of a duh type of question.
Yeah.
What is a common struggle that you find in most couples? Right? What's a common thread that you see causes potentially a lot of strife in a relationship?
Yeah, the shortest way, pretty much across all couples, is that my deepest, darkest fears or my childhood wounds, they often go together. They get triggered by my partner, and then I try to cope with that. I don't want that to be true. And then the way I cope triggers my partner's deepest, darkest fears or childhood wounds, and then they try to cope with that, and then how they cope triggers mine. And we go back and forth triggering each other emotionally.
It's really interesting. So there was a study done that I quote in this book. It's the only actual quote that I make in the entire book. It's the only time I actually reference anything outside of like quotations and speeches and stuff like that. Is a study that was done by these two doctors. I forget their names. It's in the book. If you want to know who they are, read the book. Not because I don't want to tell you, I just don't remember. But the general gist of the study was that 90 to 95% of our fears and anxieties that we have in our adulthood are developed from the time that we're like 2-3 years old through like the time that we're like 9, 10, and 11, including like our fears and anxieties when it comes to like peers and stuff like that. The study was really hard to sort of understand if you're not in the field, and so I did my best to break it down into layman's terms in the book.
Yeah.
Into like crap we don't understand yet, crap that we don't understand ever, crap that we can't control, right? Like these different fears that we have and how they're broken down and like what stages in our lives that they develop. I find it really interesting how you're talking about those very things also come through and affect relationships, because that doesn't, even though it's sort of common sense now that you say it, it doesn't occur to me when I originally think about it. I think all about like the interpersonal side of it, right? Like what is, or I would say intrapersonal side of it.
Yeah.
Inter would be between us, intra is within myself. So the intrapersonal side of it is the side that I always go to, is like the unspoken mental battle that you have with yourself every day. It's something that I'm very familiar with.
Yeah.
But it makes a ton of sense that would surface in relationships as well.
Yes. Yeah. It's in relationships. It's not just what's going on inside me, the intra, but it's the inter.
Right.
It's how we interact together, and how the way that we interact kicks up your intrapersonal stuff and my intrapersonal stuff, and then we keep kicking it up for each other unintentionally. Yeah, most couples think like, oh, we need to I don't know, like communicate better or have like be able to negotiate or something like this, but
it's actually like you need to fix yourself and figure out what it is that's messing with you.
Well, and this is where like really like the really beautiful thing about committed relationships is that we help each other heal from all that stuff that's going on in the inside.
That's awesome. I think that's all the time that we have. Let me check.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, actually, that's actually all the time that we have for this segment. If you want the bonus segment, which is coming up next, we actually are going to miss the lightning round for this, but if you want the bonus segment, you have to go over to forerunnerproductions.locals.com. I know I jacked that up in the beginning of this episode. It is forerunnerproductions.locals.com. We're going to be giving some marriage, couples therapy, counseling to Mr. Darcy and to Jake Sully and his partner in the movie Avatar, so that we can pull in some movie story stuff from my side of things and then get the real world application side of it from her side of things. So this is going to be a lot of fun. If you're not a member over at forerunnerproductions.locals.com, then you'll have to stick around here. Make sure you hit the like, the subscribe, comment in the segment below. Tell us your favorite part of this thing. Tell us if you want us to have Liz back to talk about all sorts of different crap, because we'll do it. You just got to let us know. Ring the bell so you never miss an episode. And thank you guys so much. This has been Impetus Minds of the Driven. Liz, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks.